Welcome back, SEMO Scramble on SEMO ESPN Radio, and happy to be joined on our hotline by Josh Jacobs and Brenden Schaeffer. Josh Jacobs of Redbird Rants and RedbirdRants.com. He's a host of the Dylan the Cards podcast. You can follow him at JoshJaco98. And then Brenden Schaeffer, contributor of KMOV, is a host of KTGR, The Big Show, hosts his own YouTube channel, B Schaef Daily. You can follow him at BSchaeffer12. And they both actually host a podcast called Philosophical Differences on YouTube. So, Brenden, how's it going, man?
Hey, we're doing good. Was out at Busch Stadium last night. Maybe not the result Cardinals fans wanted for that game, but feeling good on this Saturday morning.
And Josh Jacobs, how's it going, man, with you? And happy to have you on the show as well.
Yeah, it's good to be back on. Thanks for having me, Rusty. It's a good day today. Obviously, not a great result last night for the Cardinals, but should be an interesting weekend. So glad to unpack it with you this morning.
So, first of all, Josh, I wanted to ask you. Can we all agree that the Cardinals need upgrades in three areas? A frontline starter, some relief help, and a right-handed bat. That makes sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think the difficulty we're going to see them run into over the next few days is how realistic is it to address each of those three areas. And I think as we get into this, we'll talk about which one's maybe the most realistic here. With how the market's developing right now, seller's market, some interesting moves so far, but it's kind of hard to believe they'll be able to do all three things this weekend.
So I wanted to ask you this, Josh. Are we sure that the most important area to add at the deadline is pitching? So I say this because in 2020, the Cardinals lost in the wild card to the Padres. What was one of the biggest issues? That was the offense. In 2021, they lost in the wild card to the Dodgers. Now, it was only a one-game playoff there against the Dodgers, winner-go-home scenario, but they lost, and it was I think it was a 3-1 ball game. In 2022, the Cardinals lost in the wild card to the Phillies. Look, again, offense, a little bit of a problem last year. So it's been a problem in the playoffs. It's been a problem throughout the season, up and down this year. But can you add enough offense to really help enough at the deadline, in your opinion? But look, I think we both know pitching's going to trump hitting, right? Good pitching's going to beat good hitting. So in light of that, maybe adding pitching is the most important. Play to your strengths as well. But so if you had to pick a most important area, what would that be?
Yeah, I think you're right. If I could wave a magic wand right now, the offense is the thing you'd want to fix, right? I mean, they're a top 10 unit against right-handed pitching this year, but they're 28th or 29th in all of baseball against left-handed pitching. It's been brutal. But I think the biggest improvement you're going to have is Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado. They have to start hitting, right? You've got to have some of these left-handed young bats. They're slumping lately, like Donovan, Gorman. They've got to pick it up. Newbar hasn't been great since he came off the IL. So I think you could make a realistic, smaller fringe move on the edges that could help with that weakness, but I don't think you're going to solve their hitting woes without internal improvement. So I think to your point, you can double down on the strength here, whether it's the bullpen or the rotation, and add there. And I think the bullpen, as we get into this, is probably going to be the thing that makes the most sense to actually add to really make a strength, as I just don't really see a lot of the starting pitching, quote-unquote, upgrades out there being enough to make it something that we would really be excited about as a Cardinal fan.
And, look, the National League is down. A ton of slightly average teams. The Phillies, look, they're legit. The Dodgers, they're a good team. We know that. But they're maybe not quite as good as they have been in the past. The Braves have been injury-riddled. Brewers are young. And they have some injury concerns as well, right? So if you're the Cardinals, maybe you might have a better chance this year to go after it. Maybe you should be aggressive. Why not go in? Why not make a splash? Brenden, what do you think? Should the Cardinals be overly aggressive this year, really go for it?
I would like to see them do it because I think it is kind of owed to the fan base. The idea that last year was the anomaly. That was what people have kind of been told, and the Cardinals were going to work to address it and fix it. And they made some good moves in the offseason. They're in a spot now where they're in the mix. I think it's almost owed to the fan base for them to be aggressive and at least try to make the moves, even if it's not a big splash, but make the moves where you can improve couple of these roster spots that maybe the Cardinals aren't getting the most utility from, like do your level best. Make an honest effort to say you put your best foot forward and let the chips fall where they may. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to mortgage the future to do it because it is a crowded wild card picture in the National League. But, yeah, I do believe that aggression is something that the Cardinals should do because, look, as much as there are some Cardinals fans who would say, oh, even if they happen to sneak in, they won't do anything, I don't know if that's necessarily true. As you mentioned, like the Phillies, I think, are the one team that really scares people in the postseason. The Braves and Dodgers right now are not really at their tip-top shape. And we've always kind of thought, well, the Brewers might be outperforming their expectations anyway. So if you are able to get in, really anything can happen. So I do think that it would be incumbent upon John Mozeliak and his front office to be working the phones these next 3 days to try and do something to not only establish a little bit of confidence within the fan base, but the players in that clubhouse, too, I think can feed off of that if they are to add at this deadline.
And, Brenden, I asked Josh this, but in my opinion, I do think the Cardinals can address all three needs at the deadline. It's not going to be easy, but I think they can address it. I don't think picking up a bat, kind of a bench bat, right-handed bench bat is going to be overly hard. Maybe a reliever is going to be overly hard. That frontline starter will be hard. But what do you think is the most important, in your opinion, Brenden, for the Cardinals?
It's hard to say because right now, at least before last night, it felt like, wow, the offense is really kind of sluggish. But I don't really think you have a lot of obvious avenues for a marginal upgrade offensively, except for perhaps working the margins and maybe shuffling the bench a little bit. And those types of moves, I think, are there to be made if they decide to prioritize them. But you also have Tommy Edman working his way back. Are they going to use that as a reason to maybe just stand pat as far as the position player group? Starting pitcher, I do think is going to be the hardest thing to do if you're going to get a meaningful one. And we saw guys like Zach Eflin go off the board yesterday. So I would be somewhat surprised at this point if they were to get the frontline starter or the number 2 starter, per se, to start a wild card series. I think bullpen is the one that you can probably do the most reasonably, and it's one that I think is one of the biggest needs as well. They've got a number of good arms. Their bullpen ERA ranks pretty favorably across baseball, but I do think that there are moves that could be made there to be able to strengthen up that setup group with guys like Kittredge and Jojo Romero not maybe being at their sharpest more recently, having another couple of options, even if it's just one guy that you bring in and maybe you get Riley O'Brien back from a rehab assignment here soon. Yep. That would probably be the thing I think you need to do at a minimum is add to the bullpen.
So I want to ask you guys this as well. Again, Josh Jacobs and Brenden Schaeffer on with me here on SEMO ESPN Radio. If this trade deadline is a dud, how should fans respond? Look, if the Cardinals don't make those significant upgrades enough to really push and buy into this team, should the fans then buy into this team? Because basically, maybe they'll make excuses saying that, look, it just, we couldn't work something out. It just was going to cost too much or whatever. But ultimately, it kind of sends the message even to the players, if you don't really do anything, that we're not buying into the team as a front office perspective. So I think for me, again, I'd like to see this team be aggressive, find a way, and to maybe be creative in doing that. Josh, I wanted to ask you first, what do you think how the fans should respond if the Cardinals don't really do much?
I mean, I think they'd be rightfully frustrated, right? This front office the past off season was like, hey, 2023 was a dud. It was a blip in the radar, and we're going to get back to being the Cardinals in 2024. And if they miss the playoffs or just sneak in again and are clearly ousted by a National League that's much stronger than them, I think fans would have every right to be upset about that. And I understand the market's hard to play right now. It's hard to find a frontline starter. It's hard to add to the bullpen. It's hard to get another right-handed bat, but that's the position the front office has put themselves in, right? Like, they could have been aggressive this offseason and added another starter. They could have gotten more bullpen help. The right-handed bat side of things, I think that's a little bit more fair. I don't think we all saw Goldschmidt, Arenado all falling off as much. I think all of us thought Tommy Edman would be back by now. So some of that's a little bit understandable, and every team has to add at the deadline. But if they don't make a significant upgrade, or at least a meaningful upgrade that you can squint a little bit and see how it helps them in October, whether it's a bullpen arm, whether it is that frontline starter that I'm not sure is out there right now, I think that if they don't do something like that, fans should be frustrated by it. And I don't really know how the front office sells them on it, other than I know that the market is tough to make moves right now. But at this point, that's what they've got to do. And to your point earlier, there is an opening in the National League right now, but the Pirates, the Mets, the Braves, the Padres, the Diamondbacks, they all see that opening too. So if the Cardinals don't make an incremental upgrade, I mean, sure, they could be a contender in October, but I think it's going to be significantly harder as you see these other clubs around them try to improve over the next few days.
Brenden, what do you think? You agree?
Yeah, I mean, as far as fan base reaction, I think the fan base is kind of on edge as it is, especially right now. The team's kind of slumping of late. Since that Royals series, it's been 8 losses, 5 wins. So they're kind of on edge of waiting to see, could a trade deadline acquisition be a lifeboat almost to start to buoy this team back toward the expectations they had? If you don't get something like that, is it just kind of waving the white flag? It's tricky, man. I think people would be upset if they don't do anything, because I do think that the roster is constructed right now with the trend of the team currently. It's hard to imagine that they're suddenly just going to pull themselves up by their bootstraps without some sort of infusion, because nightly we're seeing the areas where you could maybe have a little bit more. Like last night, there would have been room for a right-handed bat laid off the bench. There would have been, room. Obviously, last night, Sonny Gray's your starter, so that's not somebody that you're going to replace. They just need him to get going. That's part of it, too. If you want some of these guys that are supposed to be your mainstays to get going, Sonny Gray, Paul Goldschmidt, Arenado, Gorman, if you want some of those guys to start to pick it up, I think it couldn't hurt to have those guys know that, hey, our front office still believes in this team, and we got to be putting it out there 100% to try to figure out a way to make this happen. Make our jobs a little bit easier, right? Take a little bit of pressure off everybody individually and collectively by adding some of the positions that they can really use to improve. So if they don't do anything, yeah, man, I think the fan base is probably going to be upset. But there is going to be that segment of the fan base that right now probably wants them to be sellers. So you'll never take a fan base and get the same answer from everybody. But the natives are restless, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But look, if you're Mo and the front office, what are you targeting in particular for pitching and even starting pitching? What are you targeting? Is it swing and miss? Is that something you want? Guy like a Jack Flaherty? Is Blake Snell a real option, or is it postseason success like a Max Scherzer, Nathan Eovaldi, which it sounds like the Rangers are not selling, right? But maybe it's control. You want to have a guy that's going to be in the rotation for next year as well, a Chris Bassett and Eric Fetty. So I'll start with you, Brenden. Who are you targeting if you're the Cardinals?
I mean, I like you said, I think some of the names that are the most attractive aren't going to be traded. Eovaldi would have been my guy, but I think the Rangers are going to be in it for the long haul. So no him, no Scherzer. Eflin would have been somewhat intriguing because, of team control and the notion that he's got good peripherals this year. Like Fetty makes some sense, I think, because it solves next year too. But I don't see a lot out there starter-wise that I think the Cardinals are going to be willing to pay up for. So for me, it's more along the lines of bullpen names. I'd look toward Tanner Scott of the Marlins. We already have seen them sell a reliever. Maybe they'd sell another one. And I think I like him because he is a rental, so perhaps you don't have to give up as much of a premium prospect to get him. The other name that's interesting to me that I don't think will be sold as far as relievers, Pete Fairbanks of the Rays. We've seen the Rays sell a couple of guys in Arozarena and Eflin. But I think if you look at both those guys, they're making more money next year than Pete Fairbanks will. And so they don't have to move him in a seller move. You could look at their other moves as quasi-salary dumps, whereas I think with him, they don't really need to do it, even though he would fit really well for the Cardinals.
And Josh, your opinion as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be pitching, but who are you targeting if you're Mo and the Cardinals? Again, is it a specific type of player? Like, hey, I got to have a pitcher that has swing and miss, or I got to have a guy that has control. What are you targeting, Josh, in your opinion?
I think it's less about swing and miss and control, and it's more about something better than what you have already outside. I know Sonny Gray's been struggling lately, but they have to rely on him to be a frontline starter. He's got to figure it out. But can you get someone that's better than Kyle Gibson, right? Can you get someone that's either you squint a little bit and they're a number 2 starter, or maybe they're a number 3 starter? On paper, Jack Flaherty is a perfect fit. So that's very unlikely to happen. And it's kind of ironic. You look at the 2 biggest needs the Cardinals have right now, a right-handed bat and a frontline starting pitcher, and Jack Flaherty and Tyler O'Neill would have been the perfect answers to that this season. But I digress on that one. I think Eric Fetty makes sense in terms of who's out there and being floated around. And was it going to be the most fun and interesting name out there? No, but I think he's been a valuable pitcher this year and is under contract for $7 million next year, so that's a really affordable deal. So I could see an Eric Fetty type, or I guess the other thing I throw out there, because we've seen them do it before, but who knows? There might be a guy out there. 2022, they were able to flip Harrison Bader for Jordan Montgomery. No one saw that coming. No one knew Jordan Montgomery was going to be on the market. So maybe the Blue Jays, they've got some arms, whether it's like Chris Bassett, Kevin Gossman, maybe they would be interested in doing something that maybe isn't being floated out there as much right now, but maybe that's something that Mozeliak and the rest of the front office can be working on. So as far as a rotation arm, I'd be looking for something that I love in the Sonny Gray range, but at least above Kyle Gibson. And then bullpen-wise, I mean, Pete Fairbanks, like Brenden said, would be a great name. I could see John Brebbia from the White Sox, reunion there, Dylan Florio from the White Nationals. Something that could bridge that 6th, 7th inning would be ideal, but if they could go up from that too, whether it's Tanner Scott from the Marlins or something like that. We've seen some regression from JoJo Romero. Andrew Kittredge hasn't been as sharp as the year has gone on. But if they could get another arm they can trust in high-leverage situations, I think it would help them down the stretch. But then if they do make it to the postseason, you can see a direct impact of a guy that can come in after a 5-and-dive start from Sonny Gray or Kyle Gibson, help clean up the 6th and 7th innings, and then turn it over to their better arms in the back of the bullpen.
So a couple of the trade rumor updates, some things to look at. According to Ken Rosenthal, the Astros seem to be very aggressive, looking at guys like Flaherty, Kikuchi, Jamison Taillon, even Yandy Diaz as a bat for the Rays. John Heyman just reporting about 30 minutes ago that the A's are reluctant to trade Brent Rooker or J.J. Bleday. Of course, Mason Miller with an injury. He's likely not going to get traded either. Again, according to John Morosi, Chad Green, another reliever guy that maybe Brendan would be happy about for the Blue Jays, is a target of the Phillies. They're interested in that. And also Jeff Passan reporting that Tarek Skubal and Garrett Crochet likely will not get traded. So in light of that, what are some teams that make sense as trade partners? What do you think, guys?
Well, I'll go ahead and go first with it. Yeah, I think keep calling the Rays, obviously, because they've been obviously willing to make moves, but I think you might quickly find out that they're happy to bring in Pete Fairbanks to next season. And honestly, as crazy as it sounds with them selling off a couple pieces, they're not out of the race now, so you might want to keep your closer. I would call the Marlins. I don't know how much favor Skip Schumacher even has there to be able to kind of help swing a deal, because I think he's probably on his way out in Miami, but they're obviously in sell mode. And then the White Sox are obvious to me. They're the worst team in baseball. They're not going anywhere. Anybody that's on a short-term contract, you might as well get something for. Josh mentioned Brebbia. We talk about Eric Fetty. We know Crochet is not happening. The demand of his agents to basically say he'd need an extension would I think kind of make every contender a little bit weary about that. But I still think the White Sox are interesting. Michael Kopech, you could be kind of creative with some of the names that they have, and they're going nowhere fast, so it would make a lot of sense to me to be calling up the White Sox. And honestly, for the teams going nowhere fast, I know last night was not a good night for Dylan Carlson. I think Dylan Carlson should be shipped somewhere where he could potentially just have a fresh start and play without the pressure. And I would love to see the White Sox pick up Dylan Carlson, because I think it would be maybe best for both sides.
I like that.
But I don't know if they would do it, but that's just something that's kind of on my mind today as well.
Josh?
Yeah, I mean, another team I threw out there is the Blue Jays, just because they do seem to be open for business. I don't think we see Vlad Guerrero or Bo Bichette moved. But would they be willing to listen to one of those arms of control? I bet they'd listen, and I bet you'd have to pay up a little bit. But that's maybe the pie in the sky idea if they want to go a little bit higher. Another team that I don't know if fans want to see them go after, but I could see being on the radar in the next few days is the Colorado Rockies with Cal Quantrill or Austin Gomber. They've got some arms there. So, like you just said, all these rumors, and if Crochet and Tarek Skubal aren't available, if Brett Rooker's not available, this market's going to thin up quick. And so the Dodgers are going to turn their attention to a Jack Flaherty or whoever the next best arm is. And so I think the worst thing that could have happened to the Cardinals at this deadline is for a lot of teams to hold pat and not sell. And it kind of seems like that's what's happening here.
Can I interest you in Blake Snell?
I mean, it's all relative to price point, right? It doesn't feel like a Cardinal move, so I kind of doubt they're in that market. But again, I'm at least exploring it and calling the Giants to see what would it take. Because again, that's the kind of high upside move here that obviously he's not been Blake Snell good version this year. We've seen him in his career have down years and good years. Maybe getting over to St. Louis in front of a good defense, playing for a contender, which, I mean, they're not much more in the race than the Giants are right now. I'd be exploring it, but I wouldn't get my hopes up with Blake Snell. I don't know what Brendan thinks on that one.
Yeah, I like the name. Obviously, he has the characteristics that could be, he's starting a playoff series for you. But I think it's a bigger move than we're going to see the Cardinals make. Because if you're the Giants, too, you're like, all right, there's the money implications of how much money would change hands, but also how big of a prospect do we need to to say, yeah, this is going to be the way that we go. It seems like he's unlikely to be moved unless it's to one of those big market teams like the Yankees or the Dodgers, or maybe even the Braves have the financial ability to do it. That's probably the only way that happens, in my opinion.
All right, have about a minute or so left, so I've got to go quick here, guys. Last question I have for Brenden only here. So Brenden Schaeffer, again, a contributor of KMOV, B-Shafe Daily. What do you think about the clubhouse? What it's like this time there? I know you've spent a little bit of time in the clubhouse. For example, you mentioned a guy like Dylan Carlson. How much of the trade deadline could be weighing on a guy like him, and how much could be affecting him, and maybe even last night? What do you think about that clubhouse culture this time of the year, Brenden?
I mean, specific to Dylan, I think it would be silly to say it's not impacting him. And it's not just the trade stuff. It's probably more just the realization of what his role has been diluted to. He just doesn't really have one. And then the couple of times he's got into games lately, it's gone really poorly. I think it's in his head at this point, and I would love to see him get a fresh start because I do think there's some talent in there, and he just needs some confidence. It's not going to happen here. As far as the rest of that clubhouse, I mean, look, last night wasn't great because that was probably one of the worst losses I've covered since 2016, just the way that it played out. But I think they're still in a spot where they believe in the talent that they have, and they just kind of have to find the vibes back a little bit. It could turn the other way, gentlemen. Like if you have some more losses here pile up on you, I could see that sort of fizzle out the spark. But I still think they're in a spot where as long as the play on the field can improve. Last night was sloppy. Like, you can have that kind of sloppy play with walks and inability to hold base runners for the relief pitchers. Like, those sort of things are going to cost you. And so as long as they can clean up those things, I think that will carry into a better clubhouse atmosphere.
And last thing, Josh Jacobs, I wanted to ask you about this. Who are a couple of guys that could be trade candidates for the Cardinals? What do I mean by that? But some guys that would go the other way. So maybe some minor league guys like a Graceffo, McGreevy, Bedell. Maybe it's an Ivan Herrera, Dylan Carlson. Just give me a couple of names, in your opinion, that probably need to be worried.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see any bigger prospects news of this deadline, so we're not talking the Team Tenses of the world. But I think we could see any of those AAA arms potentially be involved in the deal, whether it's a Zach Thompson, Gord Graceffo, Michael McGreevy, especially in the kind of range we're thinking they'll be working here. I mean, Brendan's brought it up. Dylan Carlson seems like a perfect change of scenery guy. And then who knows, maybe the Luke and Bakers or Thomas and Jasons of the world are using the move. I would hesitate to JC. I think they want to keep him around long term. But I would probably say some of those, like if you look at the Cardinals prospect list, guys in the tens, right? Like, and some guys that probably don't have a long-term future here, but maybe a team like the White Sox or the A's would like to throw them in the rotation for the next few months and see what happens. So I'd be looking at those AAA arms as probably the most likely to be dealt.
Awesome. Well, guys, I really appreciate the time. Good stuff. Sorry couldn't do it, for even longer. Would love to talk more with you guys, and sorry for a little clunky there at the beginning. So, but again, Brenden Schaeffer, appreciate him. Josh Jacobs, follow them again, and you can check out their podcast together that they do. It's called Philosophical Differences. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it, man.